Well, we're getting news in also of a development involving two World Food Programme planes who had their cargo offloaded in Yangon, and then the cargo was seized by the authorities. Let's get more on that now with the Regional Director, Tony Banbury. Thanks a lot for joining us, Tony. What's happened?
We finally got two planes filled with high-energy biscuits in today. Those are the first two big World Food Programme planes that have landed, 38 tons of food. We offloaded the food, and then the authorities refused permission for us to take that food away. We were told we needed a special letter from the Minister of Social Welfare. We hand-delivered a request to him. The answer back was, no, you can't have the food. And so now that food, 38 tons, enough to feed 95,000 people. It should be on trucks headed to the victims. You've seen the conditions they're in. That food is now sitting on a tarmac doing no good.
And you got more planes that were supposed to go in? Are they going to go in?
We had planned to bring in 2 planes tomorrow with food and an additional 2 planes with operational support equipment. We're going to have to shut down our very small airlift operation until we can get guarantees from the authorities that we'll be able to have the food when it arrives. We'll be able to take possession of it.
You sound furious.
I am furious. It's unacceptable. You know, for a relief worker, for a World Food Programme staff member, the worst thing in the world that can happen is for a disaster like this to strike. The second worst thing in the world to happen is not to be able to do anything about it, and that's what's happening now.
What's your message to those who are running this country, to General Tan Shui, if he's watching this? What would be your personal plea to him?
Please think about your people. Think about the Burmese people, more than 1 million who need assistance. Let the relief agencies in. Let us do our job.
Is this one of the most challenging situations you've had to deal with in your career?
It's the most frustrating situation I've had to deal with. We're up to the challenge. We have the ability. Aid workers know how to do this. The World Food Programme can mount a massive logistical humanitarian relief operation now. Helicopters, planes, boats, whatever's required. You've seen how hard it is to reach those people. We actually can do it. We have that capacity, but we're not being allowed to. So it's hugely frustrating.
And are you getting the impression that other NGOs, that other people trying to get in help are having the same problems as you, or is this just your particular organisation?
I think everyone's having these problems, whether it's relief supplies, personnel, support equipment, everything's being blocked. And we are not able to get anywhere near the people, supplies, food in. Other agencies are definitely having this problem, and they're asking us for help, and we can't even get our own stuff in.
The regime, I suppose, might say that they want to distribute the food and goods themselves, that they would prefer to do that. What would you say?
That's not the way the World Food Programme operates. We don't dump and run. We are professional aid workers. We get our people on the ground, find out where the victims are, who are the neediest. We organize distribution so they're orderly and there aren't food riots and the young men don't appear and start carting off the food and the old ladies and little kids are left with nothing. We need to have our people in there and work with our NGO partners so that the food can reach the people who need it.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Tony Banbury, with that heartfelt appeal to those that are running Myanmar at the moment. A pretty desperate situation, as we've found as well, simply not allowing journalists, aid workers, anyone in who simply want to go in, show what's going on and help people who are in need.
And Dan, it's absolutely extraordinary. It's not just the government not allowing people in, but food, basic supplies, and supplies that are so needed right now. Dan Rivers joining us live in Bangkok. Thank you very much. Now, up next on World News Asia, Cyclone Nargis is casting a harsh spotlight on Myanmar's military rulers. Could the disaster bring desperately needed political change to the country? Watching a special edition of World News Asia. Grip on power. Now, the generals have postponed the vote in areas hardest hit by the cyclone, but in other areas, the polls will be open. The UN Secretary General is calling for a total postponement. Well, the cyclone has pushed Myanmar's reclusive military government into the spotlight after years of isolation, and now pressure from the international community and Myanmar's own citizens may force the ruling junta to change. Hugh Remington reports from Thailand.
Myanmar's showpiece capital. Carved out of the jungle 3 years ago, this has never reflected the life of ordinary people, and does so even less today. The generals have run this country for 46 years. The soldiers still meet resistance in remote ethnic villages. These are struggles that have lasted for decades. They have also occasionally met resistance in the streets. Their response has always been the same. But as they face, reportedly in near paralysis, the country's worst natural disaster in a century, are the generals vulnerable now?
So people are really angry.
Now in exile, 20 years ago, Zaw Min was a student leader in what was then Burma. In 1988, these democracy protests were suppressed with thousands killed. They did force a vote, though, won overwhelmingly by democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi. The generals who'd shuffled their own leadership put her immediately under house arrest, where she remains. But the internet's international awareness and existing democracy leadership and a natural disaster are all things that weren't there 20 years ago. They mean, some argue, the people's frustrations will bring down the generals this time.
I have to say yes, but I don't know when. But maybe beginning of next year, after just after recovery from this disaster.
Buddhism is the primary social force for tens of millions of people, not just here in Thailand, but critically over the border. In Myanmar, it is the only social institution that is not controlled or utterly suppressed by the military government. So many people are saying now it is the monks that hold the key to the events ahead. Could monks again lead and legitimise demonstrations as they did last September? This weekend, the generals still plan to hold a referendum exempting those in the worst-hit areas. Human rights groups call the vote a sham, a way for the generals to entrench their power. But how long can they keep the population dancing to their tune? Hugh Remington, CNN, Bangkok, Thailand.
So could the cyclone really spark political change in Myanmar? Well, to discuss that angle, we're joined from London by Amarjit Singh. He is the head of the Asia Division for Exclusive Analysis. Welcome to our program. And will this disaster bring about political change to the country?
It's difficult to see how that may happen. Primarily for this reason, the control of the government and the army over the state in Myanmar is near absolute. There were protests led by the monks last September, but those were snuffed out. And although at the time some had suggested that those protests may recur, they never did. So in the face of overwhelming control over that country by the army and by the government, it is not clear how even a disaster of this scale may necessarily lead to regime change in Myanmar.
Now, could the referendum vote that's happening this weekend provide a window of opportunity? Could that give at all an opportunity for citizens to express their frustrations against the government and their support for the opposition?
Potentially, it might do that. There are reports that would indicate, for instance, that the exercise of the vote will not necessarily be free. So if that is the case, it turns out that the vote will be a vote in favor of the government's proposed constitutional reforms. But even if individuals were to cast the ballot and exercise independent judgment, as you mentioned in the lead-up, the last time that happened, when Aung San Suu Kyi's party came to power, that independent exercise of political will is simply shunted aside. It's not given any weight. So even if there were an expression of opposition through the vote tomorrow, it will not necessarily lead to change within the country. I think
now another possible avenue for change to come to the country is if, it's a big if here, if Myanmar opens its doors to international aid workers and organizations and allow them in, that could lead to international dialogue. But really, what's the likelihood of that taking place?
Again, the likelihood is limited. First, the big question is whether they will allow foreign aid personnel